Good afternoon on this most spooky of days. Yes, this is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another 9th Age battle report. I know it has been some time, but me and my opponent decided to throw some dice together, throw some figures around this Halloween, so I thought we would record it and go ahead and put a video for you guys. So this is an Empire of Sonnstahl versus a Dread Elf army, and this is a Halloween-themed battle report, which I will go into more details as we continue. So first, my opponent's list. So my opponent won sides and picked the side of the hill to deprive me of the hill. On the far right flank, they have a group of Dark Raiders. Next to that is a Raider Chariot. And then a block of 20 Dancers of Yema with full command. In the center of their lines, they have another group of 5 Dark Raiders. And then the general is a Princess on Manticore. She is a halberd and +1 strength, +1 armor piercing, 2-up armor save, and a 5-up Aegis save. Next to that is my opponent's wizard, an oracle on a Pegasus, which is the larger of the 2 snake ladies. That is a wizard master of occultism. And in front of that is a Medusa. And then a block of 20 corsairs with full command. And then on my opponent's left flank is a group of Dread Knights with full command, and a Dread Captain, who is the BSB, and then a Hydra hiding behind the ruins there, and then a third group of Dark Raiders. So for my list, I have 2 groups of 5 Raiders with brace pistols on my right flank, in front of that little pumpkin patch there, which was acting as a field. To the right of the Raiders, I have the Black Crows, which is a company of 18 light infantry with crossbows, a musician, standard, marksman, pennant, and they have 2 characters in with them. You can see one in the picture, which is the Artificer in the top kind of left corner. But in the top right corner, which is outside of this picture, I have my first of 2 wizard adepts. This is Zinzrian, the Weaver of Gold. He is a wizard adept of alchemy and has the magical heirloom. In the center of my lines, I have the unlucky 13th cohort, which is 47 halberdiers with full command. And with them is Captain Jonathan Whitestone, who is my BSB. To the right of them, I have my Lunarch Evangelists, which is a group of 24 flagellants. And then to the right of them, I have my Mausoleum Guard, which are the Fated 5th, so Imperial Guard with great weapons and full command. Behind the Evangelists, I have my second wizard, Calabar, Master of the Void, who is a pyromancy wizard on a Pegasus, or in this case, a floating chair. And then with the Mausoleum Guard, I have my general, who's a Lunarch Champlain York Durin. He has the Imperial Plate and great weapon. And then to the right of that unit, I have the Black Knaves, which is a group of 9 knights, Inner Circle knights, with cavalry picks and full command. And with them, I have Chaplain Beric Grimm, who is another prelate. And then finally, on the far right, I have a steam tank being proxied by my altar. So this is what the battlefield looks like. So we have these 3 kind of mausoleums and 1 statue in the center. So this is a modified version of Spoils of War. So you want to claim the 3 objectives, but the 3 objectives don't move. So you just want to put scoring units near them. You can see that there's a hill in the bottom left, as well as some ruins in the top left. And then the pumpkin patch in the top right, and a kind of a fence there in the center right. And to add even more to this spookiness for Halloween, we added the Wailing Woman, who was basically a banshee who would roam freely across the board. So every turn we'd roll 2d6 and she would head in a random direction. And anything that came within 8 inches of her had to make a panic test or have fear on them. And anybody within 4 inches had to make a terror test or run away from her. And then if she hit any unit, they took D3 mortal wounds, armor piercing 10, blessed attacks. So basically, she just killed D3 models whenever she hits a unit. So my opponent ended up dropping the rest of their army first, so they had the first turn. So Dread Elves turn 1. And so you can see this is what it looks like. You can see they moved up a little bit, not too aggressively. They moved some of their Dark Raiders away from my steam tank. And then on the far right side, they shut off one of my groups of riders, so I was down one group of riders. I'm still fiddling with these riders. I feel like I always lose one almost immediately, so I think I need to hold them in reserve and maybe not vanguard them at all. So that brings us to Empire of Sonnstahl, turn 1. So I was likewise with my opponent. I didn't move up overly aggressively. I moved up my Mausoleum Guard and my Evangelists, just so that they were kind of more in the center of the board. My Knights stayed back. I didn't feel like charging them in yet. And my other group of readers on the far right kind of moved in towards the center of the board. At the moment, the Willing Woman is on the far right side of the board. She spends a few turns over there before she wanders off the board and reappears later on in the game in the kind of the center. So it's not shown here, but my steam tank on the far left shot its cannon at my opponent's general on the mana core and managed to inflict 3 wounds. So it left it with just 1 wound left, which was a good shot. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 2. So in this time, my opponent decided to declare some of the charges. So first, the Hydra declared a charge on my riders, which fled. And then it redirected into my Black Crows, which I decided also to flee. I think this was a high-risk maneuver, which I don't know if I should have done it, because they're fairly close to the edge of the board now, and so I really only have about 1 chance to rally, and they're outside of both my general and my BSP, so I have 1 chance on a 7 to pretty much rally them. If it was just the crossbowmen, I wouldn't be too worried, but I have my Alchemist Wizard in there, so I'm a little bit more worried about that. So that might not have been the best call. Here's kind of a better picture of the units fleeing into the pumpkin patch. But other than that, nothing too exciting happened for my opponent's turn. So that takes us to Empire of Sonnstahl turn 2. So I had a few charges. So on the far left, outside of this picture, my steam tank randomly moved into my opponent's chariot and hit that. And then my Knights declared a charge on my opponent's Dark Riders, which fled. So then I redirected it into my opponent's Dancers of Yema, which had to hold because they were crazy. But unfortunately, it was, I think, an 8-inch charge, and I rolled a 7. So I just moved forward a little bit. On the rest of my lines, I decided not to charge in my Halberdiers to the Hydra. I decided to just kind of shore up my lines and have all my units kind of come together. I'm hoping to maybe magic it with some fire spells. However, my steam tank did manage to inflict 4 wounds on its impact hits and just kind of blow through my opponent's chariot. So that was nice. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 3. So this was the turn my opponent decided to declare the charges. So you can see that the Willing Woman has now reappeared and is now kind of in the center of the board. Which actually in this case is helpful for me, kind of blocks my opponent from charging, although my opponent decides to charge anyways. So the Dancers of Yema are going into my Mausoleum Guard, the Corsairs are going into my Evangelists, and both the Dread Knights and the Hydra are going into my Halberdiers. And all but the Corsairs make it in. So my opponent, the Dancers of Yema, decide to avoid the ghost, and so only kitty corner my unit instead of going through the ghost and taking damage. And you can see the Hydra and the Knights crisscross. So this is what it looks like before combat, and then this is what it looks like after combat. So I lost about 30 Halberdiers, but luckily I managed to put 2 wounds on my opponent's Cold One Riders, and I broke their 2nd rank. So I was actually still steadfast because I still had my 2nd rank. So that was good. My opponent did use their breath attack in this combat. So they burned through a ton of my models, but my models did manage to hold up, which is what I needed them to do, is just hold them for 1 turn so that my Evangelists could countercharge. So that brings us to Empire of Sonnstahl turn 3. So here you can see I did do some countercharging. So first, my Knights on the far left charged my opponent's Corsairs, and they fled. So then I redirected it into my opponent's wizard, and she fled. So I just kind of stumbled forward a little bit. And then my evangelist charged into the flank of the Hydra. And you can see that my top right, you can see that the riders did rally, so they moved back into combat. And last turn, my crossbowmen, my light infantry, did not rally, so I was afraid that they were going to go off the board, but luckily they rolled like a 3 for the distance, so they were about a millimeter off from running off the board. So luckily I had another chance to try to rally them, and on this turn I did manage to rally them barely. So, like I said, it was probably a risky maneuver, which I probably shouldn't have done. I probably should have just taken the Hydra and then hoped that I would be steadfast with my parent unit. But I did manage to rally them. You can also see my second wizard in this picture. He's in the bottom left front corner. He's my alchemist wizard, so he's all gold. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 4. So in combat with the Halberdiers and the Knights, my opponent basically destroyed the rest of the Halberdiers. I think only my BSB was left, and he broke. My opponent decided not to chase with the Cold One, right, or the Dread Knights, just redirect or just reform, and then I think I put 4 wounds or maybe 2 wounds on the Hydra with my evangelists. So Dread Elf turn 4. This time the Willing Woman decided to be a little bit more dangerous, and she moved through both the dancers and killed 2 of them, and through my knights and killed 1 of them. Yeah, so over here on the far right, you can see that my halberdiers are now completely wiped out. My unlucky 13th cohort is living up to its name. So my opponent declared a charge from the knights onto my wizard, who fled, and then they redirected into my BSB, who also fled. And I think I rolled basically max distance for both of them. I think the Pegasus might have run 11 inches, and I think the BSB ran 12 inches. My opponent decided to chase the wizard just so they'd be a little bit more lined up. So this is kind of where they ended up. My opponent also charged their general into my Mausoleum Guard. I thought this was a little bit of a risky maneuver. She only had 1 wound left, and I do have great weapons, so if I can plunk 1 wound off on her, I get the general. Alright, so this is kind of what it looks like at the end of turn 4 for my opponent. You can see my steam tank there on the left-hand side. It has, I think, 4 wounds taken on it, which came earlier in the game from the Reaper Chariot and it's several of the Dark Raiders. I think it turned around and smashed into one of the groups of Dark Raiders that was over here and killed 3 of them, and the other 2 broke. And then you can see that I think I put a couple more wounds on the Hydra. We kind of traded blows with the Imperial Guard and the Dancers Yema. I wasn't able to put that last wound on the General, but other than that, it kind of stayed the way it was. So that brings us to Empire of Sonnstahl turn 4. So once more, I declare charge with... once more, the Ghost goes through my knights and kills 2 of my knights. And then I declare charge on the Dark Raiders, who once again flee, and I just kind of stumble forward a little bit. I kind of move my riders around to harass the Dread Knights, and I also basically shoot at them with my crossbowmen to, kill a few if I can. I also randomly move my steam tank into the flank of my opponent's Dancer's Yema to help grind through there, because I think I was going to lose that grind fight eventually. The first 2 rounds of combat had been more or less a stalemate. We'd killed about the same, but with my opponent's general in there, she started killing off 4 or 5 more each turn. So I was going to lose this fight. So I brought my steam tank in to help grind through some of those dancers. So I also did manage to rally my fleeing wizard and my BSB, so they both rallied, which was good. You can see that my opponent also did manage to rally their 2 Dark Raiders, which are kind of harassing my wizard, but I'm not too worried about them. I think it has a 3-up, 5-up save, so I'm not too worried about getting hurt from the crossbows. You can see after combat with the steam tank, I took off a couple more dancers. My opponent took another rank off, so I only have 3 Mausoleum Guard plus my general left, and I was still unable to put that last wound on my opponent's general. Over with the Hydra, I put 2 more wounds onto it, so it has 1 wound remaining, but it's still alive. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 5. So in turn 5, my opponent declares a charge with the Dread Knights into my wizard. This time I decided to hold, because if I flee, I'm going to go through the Dark Raiders and probably take more DTs. So I figured I'd just hope that they didn't make it. And then my opponent also charged the Corsairs into the flank of my Evangelists. And the Corsairs make it into the flank, but the Dread Knights did fail the charge, so I was lucky there. So then we go to combat. My Evangelists get wiped out. Unfortunately, they were unable to put that last wound on the Hydra, which was unfortunate. And then in combat with the... so this is before combat with the Imperial Guard. My opponent manages to kill the remaining Imperial Guard, so 3 of them, and puts 2 wounds on my general. However, I managed to grind down to, I think, just 2 dancers left. But my opponent's general is still clinging on to her last wound. So that brings us to Empire 5 of Sonnstahl turn 5. And so this is what it looks like. So yeah, you can see that my opponent has 2 dancers, and I just have my general. It looks like he's not wounded yet, so he must get wounded in this turn. So this time I decide not to charge my knights. They really aren't going to do anything. I kind of have to resign that they aren't going to get in combat this battle. So I just pivot and come within 6 inches of that first mausoleum on the left to hold that objective. I move my wizard on the Pegasus in between my opponent's units, so that way it can see my opponent without getting charged. And then I also move my BSB out of my opponent's charge arc for the Dread Knights there at the bottom. And then in shooting, my crossbowmen managed to take that last wound off of the Hydra and kill it. And then in close combat with the Mausoleum Guard, although they're all dead, my steam tank manages to grind those last 2 dancers. My general takes 2 wounds, but is still alive, and I think my opponent, again, still clings to that last wound. So that brings us to Dread Elves turn 6. So the Dread Knights just kind of turned to face. They really didn't have anything that they could do. I've been kind of blasting them with alchemy magic every turn, trying to reduce their number. You can see that there's no more dancers, and the rest of my unit is gone, but my general is still clinging to his last wound. But I've been unable to put that last wound on my opponent's general. But finally, on this turn, I do manage to get the last wound off on my opponent's general. My general finally managed to hit with his great weapon and get through my opponent's armor save and Aegis save. My opponent did shoot at I think a magic missile with my wizard on Pegasus and put 2 wounds on him, but he's still clinging to his 1 wound. So that brings us to Empire of Sonnstahl turn 6, which at this point really wasn't much of anything left. I moved my wizard around and basically shot as much as I could at my opponent's knights. I managed to kill off 1 more, so I dropped them below a quarter, so I got half points for them. And yeah, this is basically what the battle looked like at the end of the battle. So my opponent claimed the objective in the center. I claimed the objective on the left. So neither of us got the second objective because the third objective was left unclaimed. So if we go to points, my opponent managed to get 1948 from me, and I managed to get 2440 from them. So it was a difference of 492 points. So it ended up being a 12-8. So it was a piratic victory for the Empire. But it was a really fun game. I enjoyed the kind of Halloween theme. It goes well with my army because my army is a Halloween-themed army to begin with. The ghost, she was a little annoying. She went through and killed, I think, 3 of my knights. So she was kind of a good way for my opponent to kill knights. But she wasn't overly effective. If we do this again, I think we might include more than just one ghost and make it maybe a little less deadly. But it was interesting. I enjoyed it. My opponent is still having a hard time getting through my steam tank. I think they managed to put 5 wounds on it this turn, mainly through shooting. So if you guys have any suggestions for my opponent of how to destroy a steam tank, my opponent would be happy to know. So you can put that in the comment section below. As always, you can hit like and subscribe and leave comments for this video if you saw any mistakes or if you have any comments specifically for my opponent to destroy the steam tank. I probably will do more videos in the future, but they'll probably be more sporadic and less constant. We play about once a week on the weekends, but I probably won't record every video or every battle. But every now and again, I might do a special video like this. But until then, stay safe out there and game on.